Early December, 1944. The kind of cold that bites through gloves had settled over the edge of the Ardennes forest, and for a few hours it felt as if the war had drifted to some other continent. I remember standing beside a half-frozen ditch, watching our signal engineers splice a torn telephone line with bare fingers turning red in the wind. Someone cracked a joke about frostbite earning them a trip home. Someone else cursed the weather as if it were a personal enemy. For once, the distant thunder of artillery barely reached us. It sounded more like an echo than a threat. I warmed my hands around a tin cup of coffee Sergeant Lance Potter had just poured. The steam rose in faint white ribbons, curling away into the pines. Inside the aid station tent behind us, a young nurse, April Matson, was drying bandages near a small potbelly stove, humming a tune I couldn't place. It was the kind of morning that made you almost believe the front line was miles away, that maybe the war was losing interest in us. Only the wind moved the snow that drifted between the trunks. The world felt suspended, holding its breath. Then came the sound. Faint at first, rhythmic, pulsing like a giant heartbeat muffled deep beneath the forest floor. A dull thud, and another, and another. I remember looking up, confused, trying to place it. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't demolition work. It was something alive, heavy, advancing with the slow confidence of a predator. No one in our camp understood what it meant. Not yet. But the back of my neck prickled, and I felt the kind of quiet dread I'd learned never to ignore. Within hours, this peaceful patch of snow would turn into one of the most decisive battlegrounds of the Western Front. And soon enough, that strange sound in the earth would reveal a shape in the fog. A long, predatory gun barrel cutting through the trees like a warning from the future. For 2 years I had watched our Shermans fight with every ounce of courage they had, and still I saw them burn. Too many times I saw a Tiger or a Panther sitting hull down on a ridge, its long 75 or 88 already pointed at us before we even spotted the damn thing. We joked that a Sherman could win any duel, as long as the German tank agreed to miss the first 3 shots. But under the humor lay a tired, bitter truth. We were pushing the enemy back, yes, but every advance felt like a gamble with loaded dice. By late 44 we told ourselves Germany was finished. Their cities were burning, their oil fields drying up, their railroads shattered. And yet every Panther we faced seemed crewed by men who refused to accept defeat, men who still believed their armor was their salvation. Thick sloped armor, superb optics, and guns that could reach us long before we reached them, that was the German answer to losing the rest of the war. A strange, desperate faith in steel. I had heard rumors about a secret project months earlier, whispered between ordnance officers. Something about a new 90mm gun powerful enough to punch through a Panther's glacis if you hit it right. Most of us doubted it. We'd seen too many miracle fixes arrive too late or not at all. But the higher-ups insisted we were prepared for anything the Germans had left. They believed the Ardennes was too dense, too frozen, too narrow for a major armored push. Intelligence briefings repeated that judgment like a prayer. And then, almost in the same breath, they told us the enemy's last heavy units were still out there, somewhere, waiting. I didn't know it then, but while we strung wire and sipped lukewarm coffee, Hitler was gathering the shattered remnants of his best armored divisions. The 1st SS Panzer, 12th SS Panzer Lehr. All of them massing behind a curtain of trees and fog. He meant to split the Western Front in 2, cut us off from Antwerp and force our armies into chaos. One last throw of the dice. We hoped to hold the line long enough for reinforcements. They hoped to break us before anyone could react. Neither side knew that, hidden under tarps in our rear positions, a handful of strange-looking machines were waiting, open-topped, under-armored, but carrying the heaviest gun the U.S. Army had ever rolled onto a battlefield. We called it the M36, the Jackson. A stopgap, a compromise, and soon enough, the only thing standing between us and a catastrophe that could have undone everything we'd bled for since Normandy. In the days before everything broke loose, our commanders still spoke with the confidence of men who believed they understood the battlefield. We had our defensive map pinned to a frost-stiffened board, anti-tank trenches here, artillery observers there, infantry lines layered like the rings of a tree. The Ardennes, they said, was the quiet sector. A place to recover, reorganize, breathe. Even intelligence briefings reassured us that the Germans wouldn't dare push armor through these frozen hills. Too risky. Too slow. Too obvious. I remember nodding along, wanting to believe them. But part of me kept replaying the strange thuds we'd heard under the trees. Something about that rhythm didn't fit the picture we'd been shown. War had taught me that when the forest starts answering questions you didn't ask, trouble is already walking your way. Before dawn on December 16th, the world seemed to tilt. The first shells came screaming out of the fog like angry gods, hammering our outposts before anyone could shout a warning. Radio lines flickered, then died. Men stumbled out of tents half-dressed, blinking at the sudden chaos. And then, like they'd grown out of the mist itself, Panthers rolled forward. Dark shapes with long, lethal silhouettes, their engines growling like something alive. Our forward positions folded almost instantly. I saw a Sherman from the 7th Armored try to swing its turret, but a Panther's first shot punched straight through its armor as if it were tin. A second Sherman advanced, fired, missed, then vanished in a burst of black smoke. The old rulebook might as well have turned to ash in my hands. Everything we'd planned for this place, every trench, every fallback point, was simply wrong. Around mid-morning, Captain Edward Miller found me near a wrecked jeep. His voice shook only once as he handed me the order, "Deploy the experimental vehicles." Immediately. For a heartbeat I didn't understand. Then it hit me. The M36S. The secret project. The machines no one outside a handful of officers even knew were here. When I reached their position, the first Jackson was already rumbling to life. Open-top turret, blunt angles, no elegance at all, but that long 90mm gun looked like something forged for a different kind of war. The crews moved with a tense, deliberate energy, checking breech blocks, loading the new high-velocity rounds we barely had enough of. I climbed onto my assigned vehicle, feeling the steel vibrate beneath me. This was no test range, no demonstration. The Germans were coming fast, and if these machines failed, the entire front could collapse before noon. As we rolled out toward the fog, I felt the weight of that truth settle into my bones. The old plans had died. What happened next would depend on us, and on whether this ungainly, powerful gun could rewrite the rules of survival. The battle expanded around us like a storm front tearing open the sky. The first wave hit before we had even reached our firing line. Panthers smashing through the forward infantry, ripping apart foxholes, scattering men who'd been told this forest was quiet. I could hear their engines long before I saw them, that deep mechanical growl echoing between the pines like a hunting call. They advanced with terrible certainty, their armor gleaming beneath the fog. The second wave arrived as artillery began pounding the few supply roads we had. Each shell drove another nail into our chances. Trucks overturned, ambulances burned, and stretcher teams crouched in ditches, trapped by fire they couldn't outrun. Somewhere behind us, I heard the radio operator curse as he lost another frequency. One by one our lines went silent. Entire companies vanished into pockets, cut off before they even understood they were alone. Inside the Jackson, the air grew colder, our breath fogging under the open turret. My crew worked with quick, practiced motions, but scarcity gnawed at us. We had only a handful of the high-velocity silver bullet rounds, the few shells guaranteed to punch through a Panther's front plate. Every time we used one, we felt the weight of choosing life or death for someone down the line. On Brad Coleman's vehicle, things were even worse. His stabilizer froze up early, leaving them unable to fire on the move. On a battlefield where hesitation meant becoming a funeral pyre, that was a cruel handicap. I heard his voice crackling over what remained of our comms. "We shoot from a stop or we don't shoot at all." No complaint, no fear, just the grim understanding of what that meant. But something shifted as the chaos deepened. The worse the situation grew, the more reckless, and somehow more precise, we became. We fired once, moved instantly, carving new tracks into the snow. We crossed roads choked with refugees, ammunition trucks, and wrecked armor, searching for angles the Germans wouldn't expect. After each shot, we vanished like ghosts, slipping behind ridges or farmhouses before their gunners could answer. I heard fragments of German radio traffic through our intercept team. Confusion. Panic. Reports of long-barreled American tank destroyers that weren't in any recognition manual. They called us Jaggeister, ghost hunters. The name felt unreal, almost mocking, but for the first time since sunrise, a spark of confidence flared in me. Then came the third wave. Communications collapsed entirely. Our map became a lie. Snow blew sideways across burned tree lines. Every meter forward demanded blood and steel, demanded another risk, demanded another decision made a second too late or too early. And yet we kept going. Because stopping meant letting the forest swallow everything behind us. War strips away illusions fast, but during those days in the Ardennes, it also peeled back something raw and human in everyone around me. Between each burst of fighting, I caught moments that lodged themselves deeper than any shell crater. I saw Sergeant Brad Coleman sitting on the glacis of his Jackson, gloves off, reading a rain-spotted letter from his daughter. He held it with a tenderness that seemed impossible amid the frozen wreckage around us. When he folded it again, his fingers shook, not from the cold, but from the thought of a world where she might grow up without him. In my own turret, Jason Wilkes, our 19-year-old gunner, forced himself to breathe steadily before each engagement. He never talked about his brother outright, but I had heard enough whispers to know the truth. Italy had taken the older Wilkes boy, and Jason was determined not to let that grief break his aim. I'd catch him wiping his eyes when he thought no one could see, then whispering something under his breath, maybe a promise, maybe a plea. Not far from our line, I saw April Matson, the medic, hauling a wounded tank driver across a field already littered with shrapnel. Snow clung to her uniform as she dragged him toward a barn barely standing. "Keep your eyes open, just keep them open," she whispered, as though repeating the words could anchor him to the world. I don't know if he made it. I never had the heart to ask. Then there was Lieutenant John Marsh, steady, soft-spoken, a man who never raised his voice even when shells fell too close. His driver was killed by a shard of metal that pierced the turret wall like a knife through paper. In the chaos that followed, Marsh shoved the body aside and climbed into the driver's seat himself. He'd never driven a tank, but somehow he ground the gears into motion and guided his Jackson out of the kill zone, every movement stiff, desperate, determined. When they finally stopped behind cover, he climbed out shaking, face gray with shock, but he'd saved the rest of his crew. In those moments, heroism didn't look like the posters back home. It looked like shivering hands, cracked lips, eyes that refused to close even when fear demanded it. We were surrounded by collapsing lines, burning machines, and the relentless grind of German armor, but somehow, inside that catastrophe, people revealed a depth I'd never known existed. Courage was no longer a grand idea. It was the fragile, stubborn refusal to let the cold and the terror claim us before the enemy did. The decisive moment came near the village of Steinbach, though calling it a village felt generous, just a cluster of barns and stone walls half buried under drifting snow. Fog pressed against us so thick I could barely see past 200 yards. The world had shrunk to a ghostly tunnel, silent except for the distant rumble of engines we couldn't yet see. My breath froze on the rim of the turret as we inched forward, every sense straining for the first sign of movement. Then Marsh's voice broke through the static on our battered radio. "Panthers. Column on the road. Heading south." No panic, no hesitation, just the flat tone of a man who understood exactly what was coming. Through the fog, I finally caught the faint silhouettes. Long barrels, sloped armor, angled turrets, German steel moving with the calm certainty of predators who believed they owned the forest. I lined up my sights, heart hammering. "One shot," Marsh said. "Hit the lead tank. The rest will freeze." He wasn't wrong. Panic in a column could spread faster than fire. I exhaled, steadied my hand, and squeezed the trigger. The 90mm thundered, the recoil slamming through my shoulders. For a heartbeat I thought I'd missed. The fog hid everything. Then a bloom of orange tore through the white shroud. The shell struck the Panther at a strange angle, slid under the turret base, and detonated inside its ammunition rack. The tank didn't just burn. It came apart from within, a violent eruption that lit the fog like sunrise. I heard someone whisper, "Impossible," but the battlefield didn't care about odds. The second Panther tried to maneuver around the wreck, scraped into a ditch, and jammed its tracks. The third halted, reversed, then spun helplessly as its commander shouted orders drowned out by gunfire. We fired again and again, the fog glowing brighter with each hit as the German thrust unraveled. Coleman's Jackson appeared through the haze like a battered guardian, flanking the column and adding his own fire to the chaos. Panthers that had advanced with absolute confidence only minutes earlier were now trapped in a tangle of wrecks and burning trees. When the firing finally died down, the line held. But the cost lay scattered everywhere. Burned-out hulls half-sunk in snow, infantry huddled beside wounded friends, medics kneeling in silence over bodies they couldn't save. Victory felt hollow, heavy. Our crews climbed down from their vehicles with eyes gone distant and gray. The Germans had been stopped. The Ardennes breakthrough had failed. But as I looked across the shattered forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stepped through a door we could never close again. In the days that followed Steinbach, the forest seemed to exhale at last. The gunfire softened, the German armor pulled back, and the sky over the Ardennes turned from smoke-choked gray to a pale winter blue. Yet none of us felt relief. We walked among the wrecks like ghosts, stepping around frozen shell casings and twisted steel still radiating the faint smell of burned oil. The victory tasted metallic, sharp, necessary but impossible to savor. Holding the line there didn't just stop the Germans. It broke the last illusion their commanders were clinging to. The failed thrust crushed any hope of splitting our armies or seizing Antwerp. More than that, it signaled something deeper. Their armored superiority, so feared, so mythologized, had finally been met by a weapon that could kill it. I remember standing beside my Jackson, staring at the long black barrel of the 90mm, thinking how crude it looked, how hastily built, and yet how it had changed everything. Word spread fast through the ranks. Crews from other units came to see the M36s up close, running their gloves along the breech, asking questions about penetration, range, accuracy. For the first time since Normandy, I saw genuine belief in their eyes, belief that we could face a Panther head-on and live to tell about it. The Jackson wasn't elegant and it wasn't perfect, but it had given us something immeasurable, a way to fight without feeling hopeless. In the months after the bulge, that confidence flowed into new doctrines, new designs, new ambitions. The 90mm became the starting point for everything that followed, influencing the guns that would define the next generation of American armor. It felt strange knowing I had sat behind a weapon that would echo far beyond our battered forest road. But memory is a slower thing. Long after the war, when the guns were silent and the uniforms packed away, I still saw flashes of Steinbach whenever winter wind rattled a barn door or when fog pooled along a roadside. Sometimes I would spot an M36 in a museum, its paint fresh and its turret frozen in a peaceful angle. Visitors would walk past it, reading the plaque, barely noticing how many lives had tipped on the edge of that open-top turret. I would stand there longer than I meant to, hearing again the heartbeat thuds in the forest, the metallic scream of tracks, the whispered prayers inside my turret. History remembers battles in lines on a map, in dates, in numbers. But for those of us who lived inside those moments, memory rests in smaller things. A letter folded inside a coat, a medic's trembling hands, the recoil of a single shot that stopped a column in its tracks. And I think about what Steinbach taught me, that catastrophe often announces itself quietly, like a sound beneath the snow, waiting for someone to listen.